Bullshit.
Pretend for a moment we've entered a parallel universe, free of bullshit and full of bold solutions. That's what the No BS show is all about. I'm your host, Dave Mastovich, and let's cut the bullshit. Our guest today is Abby Goldstein, who describes herself as a hardcore radio person who's worked in TV and radio her entire career. She's general manager of WYEP, whose mission is to enrich the community through music discovery, expression, and education by delivering quality programming on the air and online and through live music events. WYEP attracts an audience of about 100,000 listeners per week. Abby, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dave.
Tell me what you would say to someone who has never listened to WYEP. How would you describe it?
I would describe it as a resource for music discovery. That if you've never listened to WYEP before and you love music and you want to hear about the next up-and-coming band that could be your favorite band a few years down the road, that's where you go, is WYEP. So, a lot of those artists that cross over and make major success, we sort of broke those bands. We also do a lot of live concert events in the city. So if if it's not broadcast radio that you're into, you can come to our events and discover great music. We have education programs for kids. So we're, helping teen musicians discover their own musical aptitude. So it is the place to go if you're passionate about music and you want to learn about the next up and coming hot band that's coming out.
That's Abby Goldstein, the general manager of WYEP, and I'm Dave Mastovich here as part of the No BS marketing show. It's time for your tool or tip. Pick a tool or tip you'd offer that will help our audience tell their story, craft their message, or communicate to internal and external audiences. It could be a tool like Google Trends to generate content ideas, your favorite book, blog, productivity resource, or a tip on how to approach the career for the audience. Whatever you think might help our listeners.
So from a leadership perspective, Dave, I would say that my tip is look in the damn mirror. Because quite frankly, if you're having a hard time motivating people on your team or motivating your clients, it's probably something you're doing. We never stop learning through our lives. And, when I look back on some of the, BS situations I've been involved in, I can always point to something in my own behavior or my own actions that precipitated that. So I think it's really important to know yourself and understand how your communication style or your own psychology may be impeding your progress forward. Look in the damn mirror, man. You got one in your bathroom. Look at it every day and say, what am I doing to make this situation not work well?
So I like it, but I want to get on the path to try to help our listeners a little bit more on that. So say you're in a corporate environment and you're in a management position, maybe manager, director, VP, whatever, and you're feeling vulnerable because there's a culture, and our advice is saying, hey, look in the mirror, see what you can change about yourself. Let's talk about how someone might go through that, because when you're in that kind of environment, it could even be a small company, culture impacts things. And sometimes when you're vulnerable, it isn't appreciated and people are afraid it's going to hurt them. So let's talk through how looking in the mirror and saying, okay, I'm kind of weak at A, B, and C. How do I fix that? And then go to talk to someone about it. And maybe it ends up, they're afraid it could hurt them.
You don't necessarily have to talk to somebody about that. Talk to your spouse about it. Talk to your BFF about it. You don't necessarily have to go into work and say, wow, I'm really deficient in these areas. That's just not smart. Mm-hmm. But you can look in the mirror and say, wow, I really, I'm deficient in these areas. I'm going to improve in those areas. And then you walk the walk. Mm-hmm. Just go in and walk the walk. Mm-hmm. I think another helpful tip is if you're feeling vulnerable and you look in the mirror every morning and you say to yourself, girl, you got this. You got it. That's super helpful. I always like to think that, no one else is going to make you happy. No one else is going to make you successful. You make yourself successful. You make yourself happy. So you got to work on yourself. And, if things aren't going well, do a little introspection, do a little self-reflection. What could I do differently? But I don't think you have to go in and tell people in your work environment, hey, I suck at communications.
Yeah, no, I guess what I was saying is, I just want to touch on the tip about tying back to, I think that first step of being able to honestly assess oneself. Many of the leaders that have been on the show have talked about this very issue, about how understanding yourself is the mark of one of the many traits of successful people. If there's 5, 7, 10 common traits, one is self-analysis and understanding oneself. How do you get past that earlier in your career, when I just see it even now with some of the people earlier in their career, when they look at something and you can see that they're trying to maybe say they need to work on it, they pull something that's actually not that significant, or it's hard to pick something that's really significant, because then it is a self-esteem issue. So I guess, we're not psychologists, psychiatrists, but what are just your thoughts on that particular part of it?
I think you're wrong, Dave. We are psychologists. If you manage people, if you're in a leadership role, that's a little slice of what you do professionally. I think you have to make a lot of mistakes to get there. I think people early in their career, early in your career, they kind of go together. So I think it's how you learn. You don't know the burner on the stove is hot until you touch it. I think, when I think about my own work as a manager and in a leadership role, I tend to help try to point that out to people. When I think there's something going on, I'll kind of say to them, there's a communication problem here. Here's another way you could have handled this, instead of the way that you handled this. So I'm not afraid of a hard conversation, and I think, that's not a bad thing to be able to have that difficult conversation. But I also think people are going to screw up. That's just the way it is.
I think those conversations are what separate managers and leaders.
Yeah. Many
people get a title and they don't have those difficult conversations.
Right.
The difficult conversations are the ones when you are saying, here's something that's happening with our working relationship. Here's something that I'm sensing. Here's some things I'll try to improve on. Here's some things I think you need to improve on. Or even the annual review, instead of doing it only the annual review, doing the review without being a review, talking to them weekly, talking to them daily.
All the time.
And having challenging conversations. That's the difference between a manager and a leader. And I think it's pretty uncommon to actually be the true leader.
Yeah.
From my experience, even with just every facet of my life, I see the absence of leadership. And you talked about developing. I feel I'm developing every day. So I'm not saying that a year ago I was as good as I am today. I'm just saying that the vast majority of people don't even really make the commitment to leadership because it's not fun.
It's hard.
Really hard.
Yeah, it is hard. And it's hard to look in the mirror and say, hey, I'm not as great as I thought I was. We all like to look in the mirror and go, I'm smoking hot. I rock. But sometimes, you have to look in the even just from an interpersonal relationship standpoint, you've got to look in the mirror and say, okay, what could I do better at? Leadership is not about authority. It's the opposite. Leadership is not about power. It's about empowerment. I think that's the difference. I think people think of management and leadership as, well, now I'm in charge. What I say goes. But that's not it. It's turning that around and saying, okay, what can I do to empower my people to work to their best potential? So I think there's a real nuance there. There's a real difference.
And that's why you do rock.
Sometimes.
So we're moving on to our pop culture segments. It's time to keep calm and hit the bullseye. I'll ask you to choose between two marketing or messaging classics. You tell me which one you like more, but you only have a few seconds to choose and hit the bullseye. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
After we do them all, we'll go back and talk about whichever one you want to.
Okay.
Geico's Gecko or the Aflac Duck?
Geico's Gecko.
The West Wing or House of Cards?
I haven't watched either. Oh. I know.
Reach out and touch someone, or Can You Hear Me Now?
I'd say reach out and touch someone.
Very thoughtful. I like that. Just Say No, or This Is Your Brain, This Is Drugs, This Is Your Brain on Drugs?
I think This Is Your Brain.
Mm-hmm.
Much more visceral.
Progressive's Flow or Jake from State Farm?
I would say Jake from State Farm.
Okay. You're Not You When You're Hungry, or Nobody Better Lay a Finger on My Butterfinger?
You're not you when you're hungry.
The $6 million man or the most interesting man in the world?
The $6 million man.
I love it. That intro is so great. All right, we'll go with a little bit of music. We'll try to go since the XXP anniversary is coming up, and we talked about that at lunch. The Smiths or The Cure?
The Cure.
Okay, let's go back and have some fun. You chose the gecko, right?
Yes.
All right. What made you make that pick over the duck?
Well, the duck says one thing. The duck says Aflac, and then he falls over. The gecko communicates with you. The gecko is like the most interesting man in the world of the animal kingdom.
All right. I like it. Now, we both talked about target market segmentation and how important it is. And that's why when something happens like you didn't watch The Western Wing or The House of Cards, that's proving marketing, because they had to drill down a target that they were looking for, and you might not have been in that target. And so it doesn't matter that you didn't know that. That's part of marketing. And good marketing is when you know your target market so well that you do hit the mark and you do hit the bullseye. And you have to ignore some people. At Mass Solutions, Suzanne and I talk about all the time, there are some people that just aren't a fit for us and we're not a fit for them. So in that particular instance, that one wasn't in the target market and you weren't there. And you chose reach out and touch someone, which takes courage, because it's so easy to just go, can you hear me now? Tell us why.
Yeah, again, it's interactive. It's, it's reaching out. It's telling your audience to take action. Do something instead of just walking around saying, can you hear? What are you telling your audience to do with that? I don't know what you're telling them to do. So I think there's a big distinction there.
It's insightful. You went with Jake from State Farm on,
because I can't stand Flo. A couple of those spots are good. The spots where she plays all her family members are super fun and interesting, but they don't make me want to buy insurance. So I'm sort of irritated by her. And I think it's interesting that the Geico Gecko is still around. Wasn't it Geico that was trying all these different campaigns? They had the googly eye campaign thing that was going on, the caveman. So it was sort of confusing, but they settled on something that works for them. Thank goodness.
You went with This Is Your Brain on Drugs over Just Say No.
It's just more visceral. I mean, it's a visual image that it's unforgettable. Right? Just Say No, it sort of makes me think of Nancy Reagan.
I knew it. Honest, I almost said to you, it ties back to Nancy Reagan.
Yeah, it kind of does.
It does. And when my brother was the first guest of the first show, we talked about this. And coming up in that area, we made fun of the Just Say No.
Yeah.
The Brain on Drugs, you just kind of went, oh, man.
Yeah.
But the Just Say No, you just made fun of.
Right.
So
right.
It's interesting. And then we're both friends with Suzanne Mayer, whose birthday was yesterday. Happy birthday, Suzanne.
Happy birthday.
And she knows that I'm a very irritable sort when I'm hungry, so she tends to have a Snickers bar nearby. And you chose You're Not You When You're Hungry over Nobody Better Lay a Finger on My Butterfinger. Talk about that.
Well, it's coming at it from a very personal perspective. I think we can all relate to that crankiness, right? That moment when somebody becomes Aretha Franklin in the back of a car. I think we can all kind of relate to that. Whereas a Butterfinger, I don't know if I really. Plus, I'd much rather eat a Snickers than a Butterfinger.
Me too. You went with the $6 million man.
Am I dating myself here? I'm dating myself.
Steve Austin.
Like I'm dating myself. I'm dating myself with Nancy Reagan. I'm,
faster.
I know.
Stronger.
We can rebuild him. We have the technology.
Better. And it's showing him running 100 miles an hour. Oh, man.
That's awesome stuff.
That was great. Yes.
My brother used to make that sound effect. He would jump over something and go,
I did the same thing. My brother would laugh at me. We would do just the whole intro when they show the crashing and then they're working on them. Yeah, I'm glad
who couldn't say I love that, right? The most interesting guy in the world sells beer. I mean, that's interesting. He's interesting, but, the $6 million man, he's bionic. Come on.
Exactly. Then you had the tough call between the Smiths and the Cure.
Yeah.
Give us
I'm
your thoughts.
actually really not a fan of either, but I really am not a Morrissey fan at all. So I would, definitely go with a non-Morrissey situation there.
What makes you dislike Morrissey? I mean, there's
I
a lot
don't know.
of things. There's a lot of things.
I mean, I just find him to be really morose and self-absorbed.
Yeah. Yes.
Just not a fun guy.
Well, we'll try to move into, I kept it in around the 80s, late 80s era, and I tried to get a little bit alternative on the music side, but we now move into this episode's Sights and Sounds of Marketing. And I'll take a song and apply the lyrics to either messaging, creativity, marketing, leadership, communication. So we're going to use Aching to Be by The Replacements from 1989. Then you and I get the chance to talk about what else happened in 1989. I picked 4 or 5 key messaging type things. So when it comes down to creativity or public speaking, things like that, public speaking actually ranks as one of our biggest fears, time and again, statistically. People dread writing and putting ideas to paper or, I guess, to computer, tablet, screen, whatever. Creative solutions are put off because of the crisis of the day. And the lyrics say, well, she's kind of like an artist sitting on the floor, never finishes, she abandons, never shows a soul. Why do we spend more time worrying about how others will respond to an idea than on the idea itself? The little voice inside our head convinces us that we'll bomb. No one will like it. The idea will get shot down. The podcast will suck. People will laugh. Well, she's kind of like an artist who uses paints no more. You never show me what you're doing, never show a soul. But we should consider the consequences of not offering our ideas, not taking a chance. Playing it safe might seem better in the short term, but in the long run, she closes her mouth to speak and closes her eyes to see. Every day it's the same old, same old. Frustration mounts and begins to show. Facial expressions paint you in a negative light. Sarcastic emails are sent after Christmas, working all day. Comments are misinterpreted as complaints. She opens her mouth to speak, and what comes out's a mystery. You were hired or promoted for a reason, as you mentioned, Abby, about people when they're early in their career. Someone thought they were the right pick, but people wonder what might have been. They have unrealized potential, missed opportunities. The song says, thought about, not understood. Sadly, the downward spiral leads to even lower self-esteem. She's aching to be. You know what you know, so put your ideas out there. Be creative and tell your story. Listen to what others say and watch how they respond. Take what makes sense and tweak your ideas. Ignore the rest, as you were saying earlier. Believe in yourself and wait. Someone will get it or not. Either way, taking the chance is better off than just aching to be. Your thoughts on the theme of The Replacements, Just Aching to Be?
Well, I think that's spot on. I mean, I couldn't argue with a thing you just said. I agree. I think you don't get the big payoff unless you take a big risk. But you also have to know the stakes before you take that leap. I even if somebody tells me something that's incredibly negative, I appreciate them stepping out on a limb. I want somebody to tell me those negative things because, if it's all sugar-coated, you never get to the truth. Mm-hmm. And, usually when I'm talking about, a younger member of the workforce and I'm making a hire or a promoting decision or a compensation decision, the person who steps out there and makes those statements is the one that I'm going to perk up and say, oh, that person has some spunk and they're willing to put themselves out there. If you never put yourself out there, what are you destined to be?
I think that when I look back at 2 things, exactly what you said. Other people that have worked on a team with me, you absolutely notice the person that takes a chance, mm-hmm. either in their creative work, their writing, their speaking, or that they spoke up in a meeting. Mm-hmm. You absolutely notice it. And even when they bomb, you're still more forgiving.
Right.
The person that holds back, you don't even know they're holding back. You might just interpret it as, oh, they just aren't that good.
Right.
So that's the first thing. And the second thing, I think back to when I was like just coming up and I was walked into that radio station one day at 16, 17 years old and just said, I want to work here. And I didn't have any experience. So David Smith, our audio guy who actually will hear the podcast, a very early mentor of mine, just took me aside and said, okay, we're going to have you try taking out the garbage first. And we're going to have you do a setup for remote broadcast second. And then maybe we'll give you like your shift where you got to say one thing. But if I wouldn't have walked in and just said that, and then I had the radio bug and that changed my life. So I think for anyone out there, take the chances because you're going to regret what you didn't do. I think I don't have too many regrets about what I tried and failed, and I have failures, but I regret things I didn't try.
Right. Or the things that you know in your heart that need to be said, but you don't say them because you're afraid of what's going to happen as a result. Right. So, back to my earlier example of the nastygram that I sent to the bosses that promised me a promotion. If I had just not said anything at all, would I have ever gotten that promotion? I don't know. They would have come back 10 months later and said, oops, sorry, we screwed up. You've got to put it out there.
And even like you said, had you said it even earlier,
right,
it wouldn't have got to the resentment, frustration part.
Right.
And think of the productivity. Even though you were probably still really productive the month before Christmas, it was starting to deteriorate.
Probably not.
It starts to impact you.
Right. It does. Absolutely.
So it's get it out there and don't be aching to be. So now, other sights and sounds of 1989. Are you ready? We'll talk about each one. Give me your thought. The campaign Cotton, the fabric of our lives.
Wow. Well, I bought a lot of cotton T-shirts as a result of that.
Some seriously good creative.
That's really good creative. Again, it's like it goes back to inspiring the heart, right? It's not about buy my product. It's about who you are. What are your core values as a human being?
And it made it multi-generational.
Yeah.
It would show the clips from different eras of your life. So if you were the 20-year-old and it showed a mom with a 5-year-old, you thought of you and your mom. If you were the 50-year-old, you thought of when your kid, it just went on and on.
It was really good.
Now, from a PR and crisis communication standpoint, this one is a landmark in a sad way. The Exxon Valdez oil spill was an environmental and PR disaster. So do you recall back when that all happened and how poorly Exxon handled it?
Yes. Oh, very. I mean, the lack of communication, the lack of honesty. I mean, I think that was a moment in time where corporate America kind of woke up and said, wow, we can't do what they did. I mean, that was a major moment in time, I think, that changed the way we as a culture viewed disaster recovery and disaster response.
In the 80s, there were two, one positive and one negative, that led all the PR and crisis training in the 80s and 90s, and that was the Tylenol scare.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Which was handled
really
very well.
Oh yes,
very,
it was.
Well.
It was communicated
and
well.
They communicated well and changed their product, changed the whole industry, because there's the cap that you can't get. You used to be able to just open a cap. And then the Exxon one was the other side. And then BP, surprisingly, years later, had the same failures.
Right.
With their CEO saying dumb, unwise things a lack of communication. And what we talk about to clients is be prepared for a crisis. You don't know when it's going to happen, but have a crisis communication plan, and then be transparent and feed the media every news cycle. Because if you don't feed the media, they're going to put something between the lines.
Right. I mean, in the absence of real information, people make up their own stories. And so if you're not giving them the good information, they're going to make something up. Or they're going to pull some little nugget of information and build around it, right? Build the story around it. So, I agree. That was a really interesting. I hadn't thought about that in a really long time, but I think it really did change the course of crisis communication from there on out.
We're talking with Abby Goldstein, the general manager of WYEP, and it's the Sights and Sounds of 1989. The next one, it keeps going and going and going and going. The Energizer Bunny is born.
Wow. And he's still going and going and going. That's another cultural icon that crept in now, right? And, in fact, I think people refer to the Energizer Bunny all the time. Wow, you're like the Energizer Bunny. Yes. I tell my 92-year-old dad he's like the Energizer Bunny. So really interesting campaign that crept in. That, I would be curious how the market research went for that at launch, because I think it was sort of an instant success.
I think so.
Don't you think?
I think so.
I think it would be interesting to go back and see what was the impact of that campaign right from the get-go. Because I don't think that was a slow build. I think it was instant.
We're going to put this on the show notes because I honestly didn't know the whole history, and it was just compelling to me. Duracell had an ad that had a bunny on it, and they were playing off of their battery lasted longer, that the Energizer lasted longer, so they ended up comparing.
Really?
So you just
Interesting.
check it out on the show notes. I might have messed my facts up, but just check it out on the show notes because the first campaign was in relation to the major competitor. So it's just an interesting thing. This one, you and I talked a little bit about at lunch. Nintendo launched Game Boy, and its influence in portable game design continues even today.
Yeah. It's hard to sort of think about. I'm not a gaming person, but
Nor am I.
But you look at something like that, it was ubiquitous, right? They were everywhere, and it was like a Walkman. You had to have one. And if you look at the evolution of gaming since 1989, was that the gateway drug?
It was.
Look at the gaming industry today. It is a massive. And was that little device actually what gave birth to that entire industry?
It kind of looks that way. Like when you think, because I'm not a gamer either, but I have 3 sons and they've all played. So I've gone through all the cycles of them telling me which one was better as far as PlayStation, Xbox, all this stuff. But when you look back in that handheld, and it looks primitive today, but when that came out in 1989, if you were anywhere from 8 to 15 years old, that was ubiquitous.
It was ubiquitous. They were everywhere.
And it just continues to be, I guess, what the trends followed it, and it continues to impact gaming design today.
Yeah.
If you build it, he will come. Now, that is Ray Liotta as the voice of Shoeless Joe Jackson in the movie Field of Dreams. And it's if you build it, he will come, referencing the Kevin Costner's dad.
Yeah.
The phrase became part of the lexicon and is used
All
so
over,
much,
yeah.
and it's used incorrectly. It says, if you build it, they will come.
Right.
At UPMC, when I was there, people would say, well, if you build it, they will come. If we put this primary care center.
Yeah.
But it really isn't even actually the phrase. And you and I were talking at lunch about how so many of these phrases become part of the fabric of our lives.
Yeah, part of our lexicon. And people either don't know where it came from, they misuse it, they really don't know what it means. If you build it, they will come. Everybody says that now.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder how many people have actually seen Field of Dreams.
Yeah. And if they did, they're not realizing it was just he. So
Right. Well, and it was all about making peace with his dad. It wasn't about, all the other stuff, the games that got played in that stadium it was not about that. That was just the cool part that happened, but it was about the relationship with the dad.
Yes. And our last one for the Sights and Sounds of 1989, You've Got Mail, America Online, the voice which still greets users more than 20 years on is of L. Edwards, the husband of an AOL customer service rep at the time. So
I had no idea.
Yeah.
But think about that sound that when you logged on to AOL back in the day, the sound that it would make when you logged on, right? That sound takes you right back to 1989 and 90 and 91 and 92. It takes you right back to that time.
There will be 2 things on the show notes. One is just the Wikipedia page that L. Edwards actually has because he did this voiceover. And then there's a video interview of him, and it's talking about how anytime he gets interviewed, people would immediately go and turn and think it was their
they were logged on.
They were logged on.
I love that. That's awesome.
So, Abby, how can listeners contact you if they'd like to learn more about what you do?
Well, you go to our website, wyep.org, or drop me an email it's abby@wyep.org, ABBY.
Well, thanks for being on the show. This was really a good time.
It was fun. I hope that there's some good information out there for folks. So.
Excellent information, good tip, good feedback, good ideas for people to apply as leaders and communicators. Mm-hmm. And thank you for listening and joining us for the No Bullshit Marketing Podcast. Visit boldsolutionsnobs.com for show notes, plus additional marketing and messaging resources. Sign up for light reading. You'll receive valuable strategies every other week to improve your marketing and transform your messaging. It really is light, taking 2 minutes or less to read, and it just might trigger bright ideas for you. To sign up, visit masssolutions.biz. Remember, ask yourself, what's the big idea? And build your story around the answer. It's all about bold solutions